Everyone at the party is photographing the food. One person is just eating it. You probably know someone like this. A friend, a family member, maybe a coworker. Completely off social media. No Instagram posts, no TikTok, no stories. They might have an account collecting dust somewhere, or maybe they never bothered at all. And when you ask why, you always get some version of the same answer. It's just not really my thing. You nod, makes sense. But there's usually this small voice in the back of your head that wonders, are they okay? Are they hiding from something? Is there something going on that you don't know about? Or, and this is the question most people don't let themselves finish, is there something they've figured out that the rest of us haven't? Because after looking into the research on this, I can tell you, the person who doesn't use social media is not simply someone who forgot to download an app. They're running on a completely different psychological operating system. And once you understand what that looks like, you might never scroll the same way again. There are actually three distinct psychological profiles behind this behavior. One of them is genuinely evolved, in the truest sense of that word. One of them is, honestly, hiding something. And one of them is the profile that most people watching this right now belong to without knowing it. We'll get there. But first, you need to understand what you are actually up against. If you use social media, and most of us do, that says nothing bad about you. These platforms were engineered by some of the sharpest minds in the world with one specific purpose: to feel impossible to put down. Getting hooked wasn't a personal failure, it was exactly what was supposed to happen. Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, said it himself in a 2017 interview. He described how they deliberately asked themselves, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? He called it a conscious exploitation of a vulnerability in human psychology. Those are his words, not mine. And then there's this detail that I think about a lot. Steve Jobs limited his own kids' use of the iPad he helped create. Several early Facebook and Google executives have gone on record about restricting their children's screen time. These are the people who built the thing, and they quietly made sure their own families weren't inside it. So what exactly were they so worried about? It comes down to one word: dopamine. Social media taps directly into your brain's need for social validation. A like, a comment, a share, each one is a small hit of the same chemical that drives hunger, desire, and the high of winning. And the platforms are built on a variable reward schedule, the same psychological engine behind slot machines. You don't know when the next hit is coming, so you keep pulling the lever. That's not an accident. That was the architecture. Here's where people who stay off social media start to look really interesting. They're not immune to dopamine, nobody is. But their reward systems tend to be less dependent on external feedback and more activated by internal experience. They don't need 200 strangers to validate their vacation to feel like it was worth taking. The moment itself was enough. Psychologists call this intrinsic motivation, and it turns out it's a genuinely rare thing in a world that's designed to point your attention outward constantly. Because every time you scroll, something subtle happens. Your brain starts quietly measuring your life against everyone else's, and you always come up short. Because you're comparing your real life to their curated one. Your Monday morning against their Saturday highlight. Your insecurities against their best angles. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania tested what happens when you actually reduce this. They found that cutting social media use to just 30 minutes a day significantly lowered rates of depression and loneliness. People who avoided it altogether? Even lower anxiety, higher life satisfaction across the board. Not because they were somehow stronger, but because they'd stopped playing a game that was rigged from the start. And then there's what it does to your ability to focus. Every scroll is training your brain to expect a reward every few seconds. Novelty, hit, novelty, hit. Over time, sitting still with a single thought starts to feel genuinely uncomfortable. Studies have found a consistent association between heavy social media use and lower activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles focus, decision-making, and impulse control. Whether the platform causes that or simply attracts people who already show it, the pattern keeps showing up. People who stay off social media don't have superhuman willpower. They've just never trained themselves out of their attention span in the first place. Now, here's the number I want you to sit with for a second. The average person spends over 2.5 hours a day on social media. That's 912 hours a year, 38 full days, every single year spent inside someone else's feed instead of inside your own life. People who aren't on social media get those 38 days back. And what do they do with them? They read, they make things, they think. They're just present without performing it for anyone. If any of this is landing for you, stick around, because we're just getting to the part that actually explains the psychology behind the people who opted out. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. All right, the 3 profiles. The first one researchers call high privacy orientation. These are people with an unusually strong sense of where their private world ends and the public one begins. For them, posting a photo doesn't feel like sharing. It feels like giving something away to people who haven't earned it. There's a boundary there that most of us don't even think to draw. They tend to have a settled, stable sense of who they are, one that doesn't need outside confirmation to hold. They know what their life looks like. They don't need it reflected back at them through a comment section to believe it. And the research on these people is striking. Higher emotional resilience, lower baseline anxiety, and stronger relationships. Not more of them, but genuinely deeper ones. Because instead of spreading their social energy across 500 connections they haven't spoken to in years, they're putting it into the people who are actually in the room. The second profile is a little harder to talk about, but it's probably the most common one. These are people who stay quiet online not because they've made some conscious philosophical choice, but because being seen genuinely feels threatening. What if nobody responds? What if the post gets ignored? What if people silently judge what they see? Even the mildest possibility of public rejection is enough to keep them from ever hitting post. They scroll, they consume, they watch everyone else, but they never step into the frame themselves. Because stepping in means being evaluated. And look, that's not a moral failure, it's a very human response. But there's an important distinction worth making here. There's a difference between choosing not to perform your life online and being afraid to show up. One is a decision, the other is avoidance with a philosophical-sounding name. It's worth asking yourself which one is actually true for you. And then there's the third one, the one I said was genuinely evolved. In psychology, self-determination theory says we all have 3 core needs: competence, connection, and autonomy. Most people on social media are meeting those needs through likes, comments, and follower counts. People in this third profile have found ways to meet all 3 completely offline. Through work that actually challenges them, through relationships with real depth, through a sense of identity that doesn't need an audience to stay intact. They're not missing out on social media. They outgrew the need for it. And what's interesting is what this does for their creativity. Artists, writers, and makers who step back from social media say the same thing over and over. The work gets better. When you stop creating for the algorithm, when you stop asking yourself what will perform well, you start making things for yourself again. The work becomes honest. Social media quietly turned most of us into personal brands without asking our permission. We stopped just living our lives and started packaging them. People in this third profile never bought in. They're not a brand, they're just a person. And that kind of freedom is rarer than it sounds. Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. The people most addicted to social media are also among the loneliest, not despite their usage, alongside it. And people who never post? They consistently report feeling more connected than their heavily online counterparts, not less. Because real connection doesn't happen through a screen. It happens in the pause before someone answers a hard question, in a laugh that's too messy and too loud to ever translate to video, in the kind of ordinary moment that isn't worth posting, but somehow stays with you for years. There's a term for what social media does to your presence: continuous, partial attention. You're always half somewhere else. One eye on whoever's in front of you, one eye on the notification that might be coming. You're never fully anywhere. People who stay off it have escaped that. When they're with you, they're actually with you. There's also research showing that when you're constantly documenting moments for an audience, you remember them less vividly. Your brain is in production mode, framing the shot, writing the caption, instead of just being there. People who don't post aren't losing memories to the internet, they're keeping them. In a world where the pressure to broadcast your life has never been louder, where trips get planned around backdrops and meals get photographed before they get eaten, deciding not to perform is a quietly radical thing to do. It's saying, this moment is mine. It doesn't need to be shared to be real. My life doesn't need an audience to have value. And here's the part the platform doesn't want you sitting with too long. It was designed to make you feel like you're not enough, and then keep you coming back for the temporary relief of validation. Every algorithm is tuned to serve you content that triggers envy, insecurity, or outrage, not because those feelings are enjoyable, but because they keep you engaged. People who've walked away from that system aren't being told they're not enough anymore. And without that constant signal running in the background, something interesting starts to happen. They start to feel, quietly and by default, like they already are. So the next time you run into someone with no Instagram, no TikTok, no digital footprint to speak of, don't assume something's wrong with them. They might just be more grounded, more present, and more at ease with themselves than anyone you follow. They don't need to be seen to feel seen. Your attention is the most valuable thing you have. Every minute spent scrolling is a minute handed over to someone else's agenda. Some people worked that out early and made a different choice. The rest of us are still getting there. This channel is about understanding what actually drives human behavior, not the surface version, but what's underneath it. If that's the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. And if this one made you think about your own relationship with the scroll, well, that was kind of the whole point.